Hello, everybody, and welcome to another session of our LinkedIn Live. It's been a while since I've been, let's call it AWOL. I think it's fair to say that's a appropriate description that we have gone a little bit AWOL in the last few weeks as we planned and we're working up to our conference. But great to be back with our LinkedIn Live sessions and looking forward to bringing you awesome guests who will be joining us for our LinkedIn conversations as usual. And I'm excited about today's session, which was, really random and unplanned. One of the things that we from the conference last week was we had so many questions on the panel discussion, which was on leading change in a changing world. What's in your toolkit? And with the questions, we only got to touch from about 18 questions. We only got to touch through three questions or four questions. And we thought, okay, we need to do a session. Hopefully folks can hear. I see a comment saying no sound coming through. Karen, do you hear a sound coming through? Just let us know in the comments if the sound is coming through. Okay. Hopefully the sound works. Okay, awesome. It's working now. So as you join us, please tell us where you're joining us from. Drop a comment in the box. We want to hear from you, and this should be an engaging session. So what I'm going to do is get started with my guests. Excited to have them join me. Kate, I'm going to start with you. One of the things that I love about your profile, but I'm going to let you introduce yourself briefly. You said inefficiency drives me crazy or drives you crazy. So you've always sought to streamline, be strategic, save time, and eliminate busy work and rework. And I love that because sometimes we just tend to do work over and over again. So tell us a little bit about you and why change management.
Yeah, great question. So, gosh, hi everyone. I'm super happy to be here. I've been in change management for about 17 years. And you're right, Yvonne, I do not like inefficiencies. So, as I got really good at change management work over the years, and obviously it takes time, I realized that there were just a lot of things that I was doing over and over again that were repeatable processes and I just thought, there's got to be a better way to do some of this work. And I was just spending so much time manually aggregating data and I didn't like it. I knew it could be better. I knew that we as change people deserved more out of tools and resources. And so I decided to create Change Sync, which is this cloud-based change management platform. So software designed for the work that we do really helps us create, and manage that science side of change just through data in the platform so that we have more time to go out and spend with people and having those important conversations around the people side of change, right? And helping people through it. So that's my story.
No, thank you for sharing. And that's such a good segue into Dale. So Dale, I've known for a few years. Kate, I came across, like, I found out about this Change Sync tool, and I said, okay, I want to learn more about the Change Sync tool because any tool that can make us do change management better, in my opinion, is great. So that's how I connected with Kate to learn more about the Change Sync tool, and excited to have Kate join us again in our community in about a month or 2 months time in the summer to really talk about the tool and how we can use that. Talking about tools, and you mentioned, the data, we spend so much time doing data and aggregating data and compiling data. And do we really need that data? Takes me to Dale. That's a peeve Dale has, just doing something for the sake of it and doing those stakeholder impact analysis and assessment. When I think about data, I think stakeholder impact assessments and analysis and the time we spend on those tools. So Dale, tell us a little bit about yourself and then we can get into those questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm getting a bad reputation, I think, for most of these sessions. I started my career working for a big global consulting firm. So very methodology driven. We do things one way. This is how we work and adapt and address change. And I mean, certainly when you have a project that you need to roll out to 18,000 end users, there's a value in having those methods. But having spent the first half of my career working through large firms developing methodologies and standard ways of doing things. I've struck out on my own about 8 years ago to allow me to address change in a more fluid way, in a more creative, collaborative, design-focused way, in a human-centered way versus a methodology-driven way. And so that's what has motivated me to be able to work more one-on-one. Now, absolutely, you can't scale that necessarily, and I have the luxury of not having a partner that's like slapping me on the wrist for not using the methodology anymore. But I mean, I've found in my experience that every change is different, every organization is different, every person is different, and that the more you can really put the people impacted by the change at the center versus the steps in the process, the more effective the change can be.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And I'm not going to introduce too much about the change leadership or introduce myself because I'm always doing this session. So hopefully a few people know me, but I'm a change management strategist and the founder of the Change Leadership Community Conference and event. And I'll share a little bit more about that at the end. I want to dive into the questions. And the first question we have that I wanted us to talk about is, somebody says, what do you suggest we can do if our company has a toolkit, but you also want to add your own flair? Is there anything else we can do to learn to help with the conversation? So this comes down to so many organizations may have maybe the ProSci or their own tools, and they've been asked to do change management. And now they're saying, do I really need this? Do I have to use this toolkit? Kate, let me start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So this kind of reminds me of, back to what Dale was saying. Like, I think that it's okay to have a toolkit, right? Some standard things that, change practitioners use across their organization. It's part of creating a brand for the change team and some consistency in how you carry forward change. But I do think it is important to have a uniqueness to the toolkit. Every change practitioner is different. Every change is different. Every organization, every team. So I do think while you have a toolkit, being able to iterate on that toolkit so it becomes specific to the change at hand, to the audience at hand, to that culture at hand, I think is important. So an individual flair on it, I think, should be an open door for organizations, and just part of how they do business, in my opinion.
Yeah. And you know what? Thank you for that. One of the things that I tend to say is that tools or toolkits are just guidelines and frameworks and just principles how we do things. It shouldn't be something that is set in stone that we need to be able to do this. And that maybe brings us to the value of having those interpersonal skills in terms of how you lead and drive the conversation. Because even if your organization has a standard toolkit, if you can influence, your leaders or your team and tell them why we need to use a certain tool or framework, regardless of what the standard organization tool or toolkit is, the better, the more effective. And I want to take this back a little bit because for people who may not have attended the conference or being part of the panel to give some context a little bit, we're talking about leading change in a changing world and, what role, we as change leaders and practitioners and professionals have to play in terms of how we lead change changing. So just taking that back a little bit, Dale, how we lead change changing, and what roles do tools have to play in all of this?
Well, and I'll just step one step back and to answer your last question. If the individual can get into the shared drive and delete the toolkit, that might not be a bad strategy. But I joke, and I'm sort of pushing this joke farther. But what I would just recommend in terms of a tool is always thinking about, like, what's the purpose of the tool? Like, what's the outcome or the problem that tool is trying to solve? And if you have another way of solving that problem that's more effective or that you have more experience in, I would say feel free to use that and use that approach that, still gets to the outcome. I think that's one of the things that we get caught up in is we're so focused on the process without thinking of actually the problem we're trying to solve for. And so, understanding like how an impact assessment, understanding who's impacted and how, there's lots of ways to solve that problem. And I think that's one of the things to, the questions around tools and how I use them and how I'm able to add my own style to them. that like the purpose, and I've worked in lots of organizations who have brought us in to build change capability, to develop toolkits, to try and grow their understanding of how to drive and deliver change. And you do need to start with the basics sometimes, but I think once you understand trying to do and why you're trying to do it, there's lots of different ways that you could tackle it. And that's where I think, depending on your experience levels and your comfort level, you could diverge from the tools and come up with completely new ways of dealing with the challenges that are presented.
Thank you so much for that. I have a question here, which says, still on the topic of toolkits, what can we do to ensure our toolkits remain up to date and diversified? How can we pull in other practices like UX, service design, agile methodologies to integrate with our change management toolkits so that we have, so as to make it more rounded? And Dale, I'm going to come back to you and then come to you, Kate. But Dale, I come to you because I remember in our earlier conversation, we started to talk about design thinking and the integration of design thinking. So how can we integrate something like design thinking or agile methodologies into the way that we lead and respond to change? And, I respect what we've said earlier on, for sure, that, it's not always about the tools, but when we are using those tools and when tools play a role, how can we integrate it and diversify it? How can we know when to bring in other tools?
Mm-hmm. I think that like our role as change leaders or change managers is to be aware of what the trends are and what's happening in real time within organizations. So observing where people are struggling or where you're seeing issues. And then, you need to continue to, like the self-learning curiosity piece, to continue to push yourself to explore new ideas. I know right now, a few years ago, resilience was sort of the big trend. And there was a lot of discussion about how we integrate and think about tools around resilience when driving and leading change. Right now, I'm having lots of interesting conversations about learning and thinking and deep work, like as new forms and models in this future of work is starting to emerge. How do we find ways to integrate some of that piece? So, I would encourage everybody to find a good, publication or podcast or whatever it might be, to make sure you're constantly being fed new ideas, new thinking. If you have a favorite author or thinker, certainly there's lots of different social media platforms, but I would encourage you to go low tech as well and like walk around a bookstore. And I think that when you discover and understand the challenges that your organization or your clients or the people around you are facing, and then you kind of try and teach yourself about that, that's how you keep fresh and up to date. Again, I would say right now for me, spending a lot of time trying to introduce and create these thinking environments where people are listening to each other better, are asking better questions, and are kind of, really trying to connect on a human level, is something that I'm seeing as a really interesting trend. And looking at ways and strategies and criteria to do that is part of what my kind of day-to-day research looks like.
Dale, I like what you said. I like you use the word human. And maybe when we think about diversifying, let's think about diversifying from the traditional change management tools, because when we think tools, we automatically think change management tools or methodologies or models. But when we think that in change, leading change or change management, we're working with people. Humans are at the center of it. So how can we find tools that are outside the traditional change management tools, to say, how do we lead and drive change? So looking for that human approach, that behavior, centered approach to how we lead and drive change, and looking into like different industries as well. What can we borrow from, the way we do things? So it's about looking broadly and not just being very focused on, does it have the name change management or change leadership in it?
You raised a really great point, which I should have mentioned, which was about really like walking outside of your lane. I think when I discovered design thinking, about a decade or so ago, my wife was a leader at a design firm, and I saw their methods and tools and practices and wanted to learn more. And so, I certainly would encourage you to find those different channels. One great avenue is like TED. I listen to loads of TED Talks. But certainly there's a TED Talk podcast on specific topics, and they go all across the gamut of different industries, different forums, different areas, and really seeing, change cuts across everything. And so it's really about human behavior, psychology. It's not just about leadership and management. And I think trying to find different perspectives and points of view and applying things from sociology, from philosophy, from science, technology, and really trying to see different perspectives that you could then apply. That's the key to it. I mean, I remember listening to Tony Fadell's TED Talk, or Linda Hill's TED Talk on collective genius, and that totally shifted the way I thought about change. And that's what I would really encourage you, is to find different perspectives and apply them to how you deliver, whatever program or project you might be looking at.
Thank you. And Kate, still staying slightly on that question, but we have a similar question. So you can go back to that one or answer this one, which says, do you feel that the current methodologies or tools take into account the diversity and inclusion needs of change management in today's workplace?
Yeah, so I think I can answer maybe a little bit of both questions. I think it's really important. I agree with everything that, Del has said, and same with you, Yvonne. But I also think it's really important that people get connected into communities of practice around change. So when I was doing change management work within an organization, so I was an employee on a change team, it was very insular. And I couldn't say that at the time, but after I left those organizations and went into the consulting world, I was eyes wide open to all of these different industries, businesses, types of change, and different ways of doing things. And when you're able to connect with a community of practice around change, it's a door into how other teams are doing things that we can learn from. So yes, go out and think about, things outside of traditional change. But the one thing I love about change management, among many, is that people love to help. This is this industry, more so than others, there are just people who would love to meet with you, would love to share best practices, would love to help people through challenging change. Let me tell you what I'm doing, or let me share what I've learned from somebody else. They're all over the place. So I highly recommend getting tied in there. And I think that's where you can learn, hey, here's the toolkit that we have that we're using. Is this really meeting diversity and inclusion needs in today's world? I think when I look at toolkits from previous places that I've been, they're kind of boring, right? I mean, we're people. Right? And people are different in the way that they learn. Some people are visual learners, some people are not, right? So I think our toolkits really need to get better, right? They need to get dusted off, freshened up, meet people where they are. We are people. We want to be moved through change in a way that's engaging and not like this black and white, boring PowerPoint or whatever it is, right? If we can meet people where they are and understand that change is hard. There's a lot of it happening. It's change saturation everywhere. There's change fatigue. Let's upskill and make sure that the toolkits that we are using in whatever form or methodology as well is really representative of today's world and how people want to move through change, because it's here. It's coming fast. It's not going to slow down. So I think just, again, bringing ourselves up to speed as practitioners.
That's interesting that you say that, because it's going to lead me to my next question. But I just want to, welcome all those people who are joining us. And if you're watching the rebroadcast, by all means, let us know where you're joining us from. I see Ibrahim from, did Ibrahim say where it's coming from? I see a LinkedIn user from Toronto. I see Karen from Ohio. I see Esther from Lagos. So tell us where you're joining us from. And if you have any thoughts, please, by all means, share in the comments and add to the questions and seek clarification. One of the questions I have here, and piggybacking off what you just said, Kate, was how can mentors and like-minded communities of people help out in our change journey? What are some common traps that come from such communities that one should look into or maybe even look out for? When we think about our topic, which is change is changing, how leading change in a changing world, to me I see traps whereby we keep on going to what we know. We keep on going to what we've been told. We keep on going to those methodologies that have done a great job of becoming the standard in every job description that you see to see, make sure you have X, Y, Z. So that's the standard by which people are being assessed for a change management role, to lead and drive change. So when it comes to mentoring, how can somebody seek mentoring or seek community to say, you know what, the way we do change is changing? And how can they be on the path where they're not just learning the old ways of doing things, but they're also learning the new ways of doing things? And we've touched a few on this. So, Dale, if you had to find a mentor or community by which you would that you say, you know what, I want to be able to lead change in a more innovative way, in a more responsive way, in a more agile way, what would be your default? What would you do, and what would you advise somebody out there to do?
Well, luckily, I think that people that get into change love to talk. So I don't think you have any trouble finding somebody who wants to tell you what to do. But joking aside, like one thing I've been talking about for years, and this is pre-pandemic, and Yvonne, I think we've even had this conversation, is like the value of some type of a mastermind group. That, the thing that I think is that aligns with my philosophy around change is storytelling. And what you really need to do is hear lots of different stories from lots of different people at lots of different experience levels, to sort of get a sense of how things went for them. That doesn't necessarily need to be that most senior person. I think you see great research around the selection of the right people in a change network. Those aren't always the most senior people. Those aren't always the most, the most, I guess, experienced people. They're the most connected people. And that's where I think that your opportunity from a mentoring perspective is maybe not necessarily just to look up, but look all around you and, ask someone, how did that go? Tell me your experience. And I think this speaks a little bit to the diversity piece. And one of the things that I think the tools lack doing is they're set up in a way that caters to a very specific group or audience that might have access or comfort with a technology or an input or a way of communicating. And actually, I think that the goal here is to build really interesting, diverse, comprehensive networks of people and hear their stories, hear how it went for them, because you might be thinking that you're solving for a problem that doesn't exist, or maybe you haven't prioritized because it's not important to you. And that's where, I really like to start every single engagement that I do with any client, doing a change history and really understanding, like, what are the urban legends that exist within this organization. But the thing that I find so fascinating is you'll hear people say, oh, there was an org design in 2013 and it was terrible. And we're like, well, wait a minute, you joined 4 years ago. So why do you have this experience of this change? And it's knitted into the culture of the organization, and everyone has their beliefs and their responses and reactions to these things. And I think it's really important to understand how those things went, because maybe email communication is a terrible way to work with this group. And even if that's in your method or tool, you don't know about it until you go and speak to them. And so that might be a point of view from the very front lines versus the senior leaders. Now, I'm kind of diverging a little bit from the question, but I think that the same applies if you're a change practitioner, is trying to reach out and connect with people and ask to hear their stories and experiences, because every single one will be different, and it'll add that kind of extra string to your bow as you move on to that next program or project.
Thank you so much for that. And even to, add to that question, that's one of the things that we are doing in the change leadership, community and platform, where we bring in folks such as yourself to share what are you doing differently when it comes to leading change and ideas. We bring in people to look at communication from a storytelling angle. Last year, just towards the Christmas, we had what we call a shindig. That was where we got together, where, regardless of your role, level, or title, for people to share their role as change leaders. What are they doing? Because when we think about mentors, Dill, to your point, we can think about that higher up leader, and saying how are they doing things. But guess what? That higher up leader might be traditional, might be old school, and might not really serve the purpose of how we do things differently. But really hearing the stories of different people, how they're tackling change, how they're responding to change, or how they're managing challenges, or what tools it is they're using, is really worthwhile. I remember we used to have the Clubhouse. I say used to because we haven't done it in ages. We used to have the Clubhouse where we would just bring people from the community, whereby they were sharing what it is that they're doing differently. And that's mentorship in itself. And mentorship can come from all directions. Kate, do you want to answer that question, or should I give you another question?
I'll just add to that really quickly. I think it's important to, like, if you're seeking out a mentor, I'd highly recommend finding someone who has, been a part of different kinds of changes, right? I know that there's some change people and they, are primarily focused on, technology implementations. Okay, that's great, but there's other kinds of change too, right? Mergers or acquisitions, enterprise transformations, right? All of these, and I just think back on all of the different types of change that I've led, and every different type taught me something that was unique. And so I do think there are change learnings based on the type of change, and that understanding and experience helps broaden our perspective when we go into any type of change, going forward, right? We learn from what we've experienced in the past and we're able to apply those to what we're doing today. So I think a mentor who has that well-rounded change experience is probably a good bet.
And that's interesting. What really is mentorship? I in the traditional sense, mentorship is, learning from somebody who's been there before you. But Karen's comments reminds me of, where learning can come from anywhere. Where like she mentioned, we just heard from three teenagers who are leading and driving change, and how are they doing it? At the conference, we heard from Frances, who is in sustainability. She's not the change management practitioner, but she's having to lead change in the sustainability field, and we can still learn from her in terms of how she's leading and driving change through collaboration, and engaging with stakeholders. So our mentorship can come from anywhere, and mentorship is really important in our change journey and being part of a community. And like Dale mentioned, we change folks like to talk. I feel that the change community is such a great community that is always open to sharing, always open to learning. And Dale, I do miss those, socials where we would just get together and really talk. And, Dale mentioned something about masterminds. Those are great things, tools that can help us in our journey. To me, mentorship is also even reading books, when I'm feeling very lost in whatever it is that I'm doing. I seek mentorship through books. I just start to listen to books of people who've done it and gone before me. I feel as though I'm echoing. So I'm going to go to the next question. And, if anyone has a question, please keep them coming. And I love the comments that are being shared. And hopefully we can go through some of those comments as well. One of the questions I have here is, how important is analytics and reporting in change management space? So I feel this is an important question because when we think back to how people tend to say change is qualitative, again, bringing it back, leading change in a changing world, I would differ. Change can be quantitative. We can measure change. So what is your take on this question? How important is analytics and reporting in the change management space? Kate, I will start with you because you have a tool out there. And, so let's start with you.
Sure. Okay, so you were cutting out a little bit, and I'm not sure if it was my feed or not, but in my opinion, analytics are really important, right? Just because we're people going through change doesn't mean that there shouldn't be data around how the change is going, how we as people are trending through it. So if you think about any other type of job out there, there's typically some sort of analysis around how well that job is being carried out. What are the KPIs? What are the drivers for the business? And change is no different, right? Companies need to understand how well they're doing at change. And it's imperative in today's world that we understand the value that we bring, not only in helping move people through change, but there is a return on investment for change management. And people talk about it all the time, but people struggle to truly figure out what that is. And when we think about change, we think about people as humans going through it, and we have emotions. People, the great resignation, right? There is a cost to attrition. There is a cost to employee disengagement. There is a cost at, when employees are underperforming because they're in this space of change. And if change management isn't done well, right, there's effects to the organization. And so all of that plays into the return on investment for us. But if we can get good at figuring out how to measure change, identifying where there are areas of change saturation, identifying levels of engagement, having surveys that are returning sentiment so we understand how people are thinking and feeling, those are all key performance indicators that help drive the work that we're doing as change practitioners. And if we can easily see that information at the click of a mouse through reporting, that makes our life so much easier. That gives us time to go out and address maybe areas of resistance. Maybe we're figuring out why there's parts of the organization that traditionally struggle with change, right? And then, there's also leveraging those areas that are doing really well. If we can see pockets of the organization that have change strength, they've got that, as a core muscle, they're really good at it. What makes them so good? How can we go spend time and understand and carry that forward in different parts of our organization? So if we can let reporting systems, digital tools, whatever that looks like, help us with the science side, giving us the data, giving us the analytics so that we can be more strategic in what we do when we're out with the people, is huge. So if you can't tell, I'm really passionate about data. I'm a data geek. I love it. And, without it, I was spending so much time in teams of people aggregating data. So I had some semblance of confidence by which to go to a steering committee or an executive sponsor and say, yes, we're trending in the right direction. But, without digital tools, it's just a lot of manual aggregation like we talked about earlier. So data is huge. I'm really excited that it's finally coming into our space. It's well overdue, and it's actually pretty cool. There's a customer that we have that's wanting to take all of the reporting for their organization outside of ChangeSync and put it into, they have like Power BI, and I think they're also utilizing Tableau, but they want to put it into those platforms so they can really start to tie the performance that they're getting behind change to some other key business indicators across all various lines of business. But without the data to extract, to put in and get these correlations, these predictive analytics behind how change is impacting successfully their organization, if they don't have, a platform by which to extract that data, they're manually aggregating it and having to put it in there. And that's just, it's too laborious. We don't have time for that. Change. It's moving fast. We gotta keep up with it.
You know what? I feel change, being able to pull out data and those analytics and reporting and dashboard on change, helps to drive the case for why organizations need change leadership and change management, especially when you're looking at the decision makers. The decision makers, would love to say, from a change perspective, it's human centered, it's about people, and make it seem as if it's so qualitative. Yes, there are qualitative aspects to it, but if you can quantify the shifts in something as just simple as you start an engagement, you do an assessment or culture audit, you understand the sentiments and where it measures, to now when you are midpoint or you're at implementation, to be able to do that same survey. And I'm just talking like basic change management here, to be able to now say, 1 year on or 6 months on, we've done XYZ as various change tactics and initiatives, to help drive the change. And then when we do a change assessment down the line and we say, these are where people's sentiments are, we can see if there's been a movement or if there's been a shift. That is just simple data. Yep. Gail, what's your take? I love Ibrahim talks about data-driven change management,
Yeah.
So Ibrahim, anything you want to share in the comments, by all means share. But Dale, what's your take on data-driven change management or using data and reporting?
So do you know what I think is like really held this back in the past is like you measure the data that you have access to. And so
Mm,
often we get caught in systems and structures within organizations that have lots of data related to the finance team or technology data, and actually needing to put the structures in place to gather the right data in order to track how things go. And I actually think there's some really interesting opportunities using like AI type of technology to understand what people are saying and how they're speaking and communicating through tools to understand how change is going and actually use really meaningful data that applies very closely to the change work, as well as I think making sure that you take the time in advance. And I mean, I do this even with like individual coaching work, that we define really clear goals of movement you want to see. And I think that there's some interesting stuff you could do around nudging and behavior change, that like you can track the number of times people use a certain service or click a certain button, or there's types of things that you can actually track and measure in a very quantifiable way that will indicate whether or not you're seeing the change that you want to see. The problem I think happens is we have very generic kind of definitions of what we're trying to see at the end of things. And the classic example is like that kind of smiley face study of like, I feel like I understand what the change like is going to be. I've received the communication that tells me what's going to happen, and those types of metrics that have traditionally driven some of the analytics around change just don't actually tell us what we need to know. And that's where I would challenge leaders and change people as they go into projects. Be creative, like punch out of the box of this. Like one example is a culture change program that I did down with a client down in the US, where there was a real culture of bureaucracy and hierarchy, and we were discovering that the CFO needs to sign off on every cell phone purchase, like $100 purchases. And it created this really, rigid bureaucratic process. And then we were able to change the policy and then track where actually people were making purchases at a certain, we just changed the tolerance in the finance system, and the behavior changed, the culture changed, and we could track very, very quickly to see how people were feeling comfortable with that new way of working just through the number of like purchases that were made in the system. So, I think that there's really interesting, innovative, creative ways that we could track behavior change, and it's around taking the time to think about what data you need, and then creating the tools and systems to gather it properly, instead of relying kind of lazily on the old ways that we would track change that are largely driven by qualitative sentiment.
no, thank you so much for that. I love that you say we can even track behavior, because historically, people have. Am I gonna get into trouble with this if I say people have lazily just said, "Oh, change is qualitative." You can't track it. Yes, there's a lot of sentiments that is qualitative. And even, when we spoke about, we had folks come in and we spoke about what does bad change look like? What does the experience look like? Sometimes it's how people are feeling, and I still feel, or I believe that we can measure how people are feeling, but it starts with also the data we're starting with, the source of our data, the baseline that we're starting with. So if we go into the project or the initiative with a data-driven approach, we can start to capture baseline data, and we can start to capture what it is that we really need to report on. One of the things I do in my change strategy is I always determine what are our key performance indicators. What are we trying to achieve on this project? If at the end of the day, we are not able to at the end of the line say, this were we able to support the need for this project, were we able to meet these KPIs, then have we succeeded or have we failed? And what's also interesting, it's interesting that you say that, Dale and Kate. I have a question. How would you have measured this? I got into a project. It was like, we need to implement this technology solution, and this is to a question that someone has. So I'm going to read out the question, and it says, how do you influence decisions which directly have an impact on the success of the change? For example, a technology solution is chosen yet does not meet the user's needs. and not enough time allocated to testing, lack of quality. Sometimes we go in there and we have to implement this solution, but it may not meet the user's needs or the organization's needs. And I had this real life example. I got in there was a change solution we had to implement. And as we started to do the impact analysis and speak to the stakeholders and engage with them, we found out that if we'd implemented that solution, it would have gone AWOL. As in they would have had to fire people. So for something like that, how do you measure the success? Is it you measure the success based on the organization as a whole or what the program is trying to achieve? How do you change direction?
Oh, we lost her.
We lost her. Why don't you take that one to start? Well, Yvonne tries to log back in. Maybe somebody was listening and they're like, you can't have anyone answer this question. Cut it off.
Okay, I think we're still live. Go ahead.
I think so. So Dale so kindly punted that my way. So I think there's different measures at different levels, right? I mean, the reality is if an organization is choosing some sort of enterprise resource planning system, it's to do something better. And I've done many ERPs over the years, and here's the one truth, that it will make some people's jobs easier and some people's jobs will be more difficult, right? So a brand new shiny system is not going to fix everything for everybody. Again, it will for some and it won't for others. So I think it's understanding, okay, what is at the organizational level, what is this company trying to achieve, right? Is it, if it's a financial system implementation, are they really wanting to see transparency into financial data across, all of their various cost centers? Are they looking for granular reporting detail around, expenses, spend, whatever the case may be? Like, what is it that they're trying to achieve? And I think that's one measurable that once we are post-implementation, then we can say, okay, let's pull some of these KPIs. Is this system at the highest level achieving what it is that we wanted it to achieve, right? The intent of it.
Okay,
then I think there's the lower ones.
Let me challenge you there a bit.
Yeah.
So what if it's achieving the program objectives?
Yep.
Well, it's not achieving, maybe the program wasn't even founded on the right, foundation, because sometimes you have programs that are out there to build castles. So how do you change the direction as a change person when you come in and you find out this is not, this isn't going to work, So do you just stick to this is what the program was set out for? This is the KPI of the program, and you've been brought in as a change person to help achieve that? Or how do you influence the program to change direction to say this is not going to work and these KPIs don't make sense?
Yeah.
Because, hey,
can I jump in?
I think we first have to understand what the intent is, right? Because if we don't understand the intent, then we don't know if it's not meeting the needs for the organization at that program level. So I think if we understand that, then it's from the bottom up, right? So then it's being out there with the people, understanding your various stakeholder groups, and what does this change mean to them, right? It's like the 5 W's plus the how. So what, why, who, what, where, why, whatever, right? 5 W's.
Yes, and you know what? I like
where,
that.
when, why, and how. So, then it's figuring that out and being able to then bubble it up, right? If we go out and we're understanding those 5 W's and the how is this going to impact, good, bad, or otherwise, by these various groups, then we can, it's almost like reverse engineering it, being able to say, okay, we understand that this is the intent of the program, but in order to reach that, the people who are actually impacted by doing the work in sum total, that has to ultimately achieve what that program end state goal is. And if we're out there and we're recognizing that, yeah, that's a pie in the sky and that all conceptually makes sense, but in practice, here's how it's impacting the people. And it's not going to work. If we add all of this up, it's not going to reach that goal. I think when we're out there and we're able to have those conversations and document that, and then carry that forward as an influencing, those in charge, we come with information, right? We come with real data. We come with here's how it's actually going to play out. And by the way, everybody up there, we're the ones who are always boots on the ground working with the people to get this change to work. And part of our
yeah,
process is
I like
figuring
that.
it out.
I like that. And that's why it's important we're working with people. And like you say, we take the data back to influence the direction of the project or the program. So it's not just about saying, this is how I feel, it's not going to work. When we start to work with the people on the ground and we're capturing that data, that's what's going to build our business case to tie it into why it should work or not. And it's also about looking at things from an organizational perspective or objective, like Ibrahim says, and which Karen said earlier. When you look at even something like McKinsey's and you look at, the structures and the goals of the organization and the systems and the processes and the leadership style, when we look at change should not always be looked at in isolation. We need to look at it in context of the organization, and that's why we do an organizational impact analysis of the change we do. Dale, I want to throw that at you. You had something to add to that.
I mean, I think one of the things to consider is that individual who says, "Oh, this change isn't going to do what it needs to do." I think, like Kate nailed that, to say that actually, change management is a utilitarian practice. There's going to be 51% of the people, or as long as 51% of the people are, ending up in a better place, there may be 49% that are worse off. And I think that that's one of the things that is a great challenge for change leaders. And maybe better communication had to be done at the beginning to say, we recognize this doesn't solve your problem, but this is the problem it does solve. So being better at communicating the case for change earlier. I think often that communication happens way too late because we don't want to get people riled up, or you kind of kick that can down the road. Also, as Kate was talking, she was joking around about the five W's. I also say, use an innovation tool called the 5 Whys, where you ask the why question why over and over and over again at the beginning, so that as people are driving a program or a solution forward, we're really clear on what that problem that we're trying to solve for. I think often we think, we lack HR data, we need a new HRIS. Well, what does our competitor use for HRIS? Well, they use Workday, so we better use Workday too. I think that there's a lot of decisions that get made without really driving down into the needs of the organization. The other tool that I'll suggest in a very practical way for change leaders, if they genuinely see a program going off the rails, I love to use a tool called a pre-mortem. So before any project sort of kicks off, you bring the key decision makers around the table to identify all of the reasons why this project is going to fail. And you get into very specifics around the challenges or the things that are going to prevent it from being successful. And then you kind of come out with this laundry list of things to anticipate. Now, it's not meant to end the project, but if you discover aspects of the pre-mortem that you really can't solve for, then you have an existential question to ask about the program. So it gives you that data that you might need if the project truly is doomed to fail.
Thanks for that. Oh my gosh, we could always go on talking about change. And I was about to bring in another question off of that, Dale, and then I looked at the time and I saw 12:48, and I'm thinking, okay, I don't have time for that one. But one of the things I want us to end with is the question we have here, as in, what's in your toolkit for leading change in a changing world? What's the one thing that you're doing differently now when it comes to how you lead, drive, or manage change? And I'll start with you, Kate.
Well, obviously technology for me, right? So that's the one thing, is just having some sort of digital aspect to what you're doing, right? Don't try to do it all by hand anymore. It's too laborious. So certainly, something, a digital toolkit, whatever that may be, to help guide the work. And then I know it's more of a mindset, but it's always be curious. And I know I mentioned this in the conference, but there's that age-old adage, right? Seek to understand, then to be understood. And I think that a lot of times in the change management space, we as change practitioners, we always feel like we have to have all the answers, right? We want people to understand what's happening. It's really important for us that we take it out there and we answer all of these, questions that people have. And that's even tough sometimes if it's more of an agile approach, because we don't have all the answers all the time, right? We're discovering them as we go. But point being, I think we have this tendency to carry information forward, and we're seeking to be understood. because that's what our job is. But
Mm,
before that, it's seeking to understand and
mm.
then to be understood. So I think as much as it's not a true tool, I think it's a mindset around how we approach change, and always making sure that we have that mindset in our toolkit.
Thank you so much for that. And Dill, how are you leading change in the changing world?
So, I'll take this back to one of your questions earlier as well around how to diversify your toolkit. And I would recommend that like all change leaders become very comfortable in the area of behavioral science. So whether that's, picking up Katie Milkman's podcast, Choiceology, or looking at Malcolm Gladwell's revisionist history, reading Richard Thaler's Nudge, like nudge theory, behavioral economics, behavioral science, to understand why people make the decisions they make and how and why they think the way they think and what motivates them, I think is a really important skill set that will make everyone that better change manager. And so, I mean, this is, I think, why Kate and I work so well, like talking together. We kind of bring both. We have the yin and the yang approach to the change that I'm a bit of a podcast junkie, and I'm always reading something. And I think that like trying to dive into an area like that around why and how we think the way that we think, and then trying to bring some of those stories to bear. And I mean, there's one story that I always use in working in healthcare where, in the UK, the government identified that there's something like 30% of doctors were prescribing 70% of antibiotics. And they used a nudge theory approach, and they literally just mailed a letter to those doctors. And they didn't tell them to do anything. They just said, by the way, you are in the group that prescribes the most antibiotics in this country. And it completely changed the behavior. And you think about change management and the effectiveness of how we do it and how we track it. And that was just simply down to using behavioral science to understand how people would respond to that information. So, lots of cool stories, lots of interesting stuff in there you can apply on your day-to-day basis.
I love that. I love that. And on that note, I want to make a direct plug for two events that we do have coming up in our community. One of them is a book club discussion, and it's going to be on the book Neuroscience for Organizational Change Management by Hilary Scarlett. So when you said, well, Dale, when you spoke about, behavioral science and neuroscience, it just reminded me we have that book discussion coming up, and we actually have the author of the book who is going to be part of that discussion. And so that's
cool.
That's June 29th. We're having her. We're going to talk about the book. So if you need to read a book on change management, and that's another trend we see leading change in the changing world, which is around the neuroscience and behavioral science in terms of how we lead and drive change. So join us for that on the book club. I'm going to drop the link in the comments or the information, or if you're part of our community. Another event that we have coming up, and to me, that is my own tool to answer the question in terms of how we're leading change in the changing world, is moving more or focusing more on like the behavioral side of things, the interpersonal side of things, more change leadership, developing change leadership skills, as opposed to putting all of our focus on the change management tools and methodologies. So my focus more is that as we think about the post-pandemic world, we think about the future of work, the new world of work, we think about how, regardless of your role or title, we're all becoming more responsible for leading and driving and managing change, is that we start to look at our change leadership skills and competencies in terms of how we move change forward, how we drive it, and how how it interacts with change management models and methodologies. So I'm not saying we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We still have those models, we still have those tools, we still have those methodologies, but how are we integrating it with the interpersonal skills around, the behaviors, the people centered change, those type of relationships. So I'm very big on change leadership, and we are actually having a free masterclass webinar tomorrow, same time as around about now, 12 noon, on how to become a more successful change leader. So I'm going to drop the link there as well and plug that. And we are at 12:54. I don't believe it. We're almost 10 minutes over. So Dill, one last word you would add, one word, as we leave this conversation. You can make it 10 words, but what's that one last word? And Kate, you can think about yours as well.
Gosh, you always do this, don't you? I should come prepared with something more whimsical. I mean, the one word I'll say is listen. As
Listen.
goes back to what we talked about during the conference. You don't have to have the answers. Listen and ask good questions.
Okay, and so while I'm asking Kate her question, Dill, Karen wants you to drop the reference you just mentioned
Sure.
about the behavioral science sources. So drop that in the comments for her. And I'll
Yeah.
also drop the stuff around the neuroscience for organizational change discussion.
Or I could in when the replay is posted, I could post some of those.
Or some links there. All right, sounds good. I,
The last word.
he wanted to, Dale's dog wanted to be part of the discussion.
That's right. They're signing off. No, I think mine it's similar to Dale's, right? But I mean, mine is around, and I said it before, but curiosity. And I think if there's another piece to that, though, right? If we're going to be curious, then we have to be willing to change ourselves. Right? Because if we really go out and we seek to understand what people need, their needs might not always align to what we're used to doing, or that old way, or that methodology, or that old toolkit that we had, right? So, be curious, but also be willing to change. And I think it was Krista at the conference, right? Unlearn what we've always known and relearn it to better meet the needs of the people that we're serving going through change.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. If I had to add one, I would also say, change, being open-minded, so, like, and I think it all encompasses what we've just said. First of all, we have to be willing, we have to be open-minded, willing to listen, not always going in with the answers, be curious to explore what's out there, and be willing to unlearn and relearn a better way of doing things. So, amongst the three of us here, we have, collective over 60 years, 60 years, 50 years experience. So even on the panel, when we had the discussion. So it's easy for us to go into that project or change and say we have all the answers and we just want to do things the way we've always done it. But if we're just willing to, like Dill said, listen, like what you said, Kate, be curious, be open-minded, be willing to, unlearn that how we know it may not always be the way forward, and be willing to relearn how to do it better. I think that would be the key to leading change in the changing world. So thank you, Kate. Thank you, Dill. Dill, what's the name of your dog? We have to thank the dog as well.
Thank Otis for his contribution to the end.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank Otis as well for his final contribution to the discussion. It's been great having you folks on this discussion as usual, and we could go on for the other hour, I'm sure. And I look forward to having the continued discussions in our community. Dale, I look forward to the mastermind that you've been promising to do. We have to make that mastermind happen. Let's talk about it. Let's plan for it. I'm happy to, do something in our community. And Kate, I look forward to having you back where we can really talk about tools and, talk a little bit more about even Change Sync as a tool and how that's making life easier for us, because I know you're all about ease, and simplifying it. There's no, why do all that work if we can have the work and still get double the results? By all means, so I look forward to having you back to have those conversation. And I look forward to all of you who can join us, tomorrow for our free change leadership masterclass. And I will drop the link. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now. And thank you to everyone who joined us in the comments. Thank you for all the great conversations. Karen, Lisa, Ibrahim, Esther, all of you. I see you. We see you. Thank you for joining us. Bye for now, everybody.
Bye now.
Bye. Thank you.